ideas and concepts need to be attractive to their audience. That's true if you're a startup entrepreneur opening a bricks and mortar retail store. And it's also true when you're practicing thought leadership. The question is the same. Why would people come to you and spend time in your space or with your idea? That balance comes down to having the right concept in the right context. You have to really know your audience. Today, I speak with Ward Kampf. He's the president of Northwood Retail, which leases, manages, and markets a portfolio of over 5 million square feet of mixed use and community properties. In today's conversation, we'll explore the balance of content and context for an idea. We'll look at how to evaluate ideas when they're presented so that you can spot an opportunity. And we'll talk about vision, strategy, and execution. I'm Bill Sherman, and you're listening to Leveraging Thought Leadership. Ready? Let's begin. Welcome to the show, Ward.
Thanks for having me, Bill. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
It's a delight. So I'm looking forward to this conversation about how do you spot ideas? How do you identify which ones have potential and then help them to scale? And you come from the world of retail. So what I'd like to do is a little bit of a level set. Give people a sense of what your role is within the organization, of what are you doing to spot ideas and communicate them?
Well, I think my role within the organization, obviously president of Northwood Retail, but I come from a leasing background. And if you think about retail, 70% of the GDP in the US is consumption. And so we sit around and think about, part of my job is what's next, what's the new frontier. And then I always think about content and context. And so just briefly explaining content.
Yes, please define both of those, because I think you've got a little bit different. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think about context could be the city we're in, the market we're in, and then obviously the asset we're looking at is kind of the context. And, when I'm thinking about that, I think about whether there's a tailwind of, job growth, education, et cetera. But I also think about what could we do to program this center, place make, and make this center better. And so we've got to have those ideas. And as we're thinking about content, and that is really the tenant mix, whether it's restaurants, newer tenants, some of the digital tenants, or we're transitioning one of our centers to Lux, we always think about, is it transferable? Does it serve the market? Is it first to the market, et cetera? So that's what we think a lot about in content and context. And then we think about size. Is it 250,000 feet that serves this market? Is it 600,000 feet in Austin? Is it 80,000 feet in Charlotte? So we always think about context because retail's gone through this evolution that is, over the years, it was the mall, always suburban America, just, it was 1.5 million, 2 million square feet. That's not the content and the context we think about because we don't play in that space. And I think from 1960 to kind of 2010, that's how people grew, right? That's how retail grew. Mm-hmm. And then you had the discounters, et cetera, come along, Walmart, Target, et cetera. But if you think about from kind of the late 60s into the mid 2000s, so we had the rise of e-commerce, it was generally everybody grew through the mall. And what changed, I think technology really plays into the content and context piece because technology really changed retail a lot. We've gone through a lot of different, changes. And I'd say that's everything from the iPhone to the iPad to an AT&T store, et cetera. And then also just how people shop. Some people look at hours on their phone, or they'll be near a store and, there's a lot of geofencing that people can do targeted ads. So I think we think a lot about that as we think about retails, what has changed, why we need to be so thoughtful about content and context. And so when we think about the content, it could be a specialty grocer like Jimbo's in North County, San Diego. with an Apple store, adding better food, bring in a newer tenants like Viore, Goriana Jewelry, et cetera. So that's kind of how we think about it. Doesn't have to be 1 million square feet. It can be highly productive in a small setting if you bring the right tenants. And productivity is kind of everything, right? You want to bring
Right.
and you want to be relevant in this environment.
So let me push on this a little bit as well. You talk about not only the mix of tenants
Right.
in the space, but really shaping an experience and almost a story and a journey through
Yes.
the space, right?
Yep.
And with that, I think becomes important because it's not just context and content separately, it's how they come together from the perspective of the person who walks into the space, right?
Correct. And they can all view it very differently. I think content and context, the reason I use that is, every market's different. You could go to a food hall, and I call that authoritative food, at a
Mm-hmm.
center. It's got something for everyone, right? So
Right.
that we have that at Fifth and Broadway in Nashville. And so that is part of the content of that asset is we have one of the largest, highest grossing food halls. And so I think you've got to be very thoughtful of the markets you're in. And like you said, how it brings people together, the consumer, and then how we view that and what do we want? What's our desirability? But I think it also goes back to being highly productive in this space. If you have 80,000 feet, I've seen guys that have centers that are very powerful because of the content they put in there. And I see North Park Mall across the street from our office, which is probably one of the top 3 malls in the country that's almost 2 million square feet. So, your perspective is supply, demand. We always think about that. But I think more importantly, it's like, I do think the content is really what brings it together. And what's made things different, Bill, is, you think about it was always the mall. It was always kind of the department stores. Those were the
It was
channels.
formulaic.
Yeah, it was very formulaic. And the general mall kind of 60, 70, 80, 90 mall guys, Simon, DeBartolo, et cetera, those guys all had a very, it was called the department stores, go get 100 acres of land. Basically, you put all the same tenants in, national tenants.
Mm-hmm.
And I think going back to content and context, one thing we really think about is who's the great regional tenant, but more importantly, who's that great local tenant? We think that in context, 15% of your tenancy could be local, but it could be 80% of the personality of the project. And that could be
Mm-hmm.
a restaurant. There's, we've got a shoe repair store at one of our assets that people go to, a tailor, Sessions Pilates, et cetera. So we really think about what it is that's local that could be part of the personality of the asset. And I think that's what makes things more unique. And that's what people are looking for.
Yeah. So whether it was the classic old Main Street that you walk down and it very much had character town to town, city to city, here I want to ask the question of there are steps you take specifically to go into markets to find those tenants, right? Whether they're local or they're local who are scalable beyond. And you and I have had a conversation around Dry Bar. I would love for you to share that story in terms of its origin story and how it
Yeah,
relates.
it was one of the, it's really where things began to change. You think about kind of 10, 11, you're kind of the DCC guys were starting to come up, but this new wave of tenants was already in motion. And so we flew to LA, we're in Brentwood, and Allie Webb and her brother, I meet them. And she has a concept. Her first one was open in Brentwood, and she explained the concept very clearly. I don't do color and cut. Allie Webb, the founder. And I've been a stylist for 13 years. I've done this out of my van. And we think we can take this and scale it. And when you take color and cut out, that makes it very simple. And then you don't think about, I got it within 5 minutes. She was so
Uh-huh.
crystal clear on what it was. But, my daughter in her teens, who's now, in her late 20s, to my wife, we've got the holiday party. It's girls that are 10 going to their first, father daughter dance. It's the wife going to the Christmas party. It's our workers. So they created something very unique. They carved a niche out of the hair industry that there was a need for. And it's incredible. And it was proprietary to them. And now they obviously have transitioned to products, which are sold in Ulta and, very high end products. So it's a fascinating story. And it's, I truly believe founders kind of create this. Somebody obviously gave Allie the courage to say, hey, you need to go open a store instead of driving
Mhm.
around LA. So,
Well, and this, I think, gives a nice bridge between the world of thought leadership and then the world of retail concepts, right?
right,
Where an entrepreneur spots an idea, but on their own, they may be working out of the van, whether they're publishing online, sharing their ideas or trying to get thoughts out there. But then the same sort of thing of how do I reach scale? How do I get this idea so that more people encounter it? Because, like you said, once it was in a store format, more and more people could encounter her sort of solution rather than just, have to hope that her van would reach them,
right.
right? And
I
that's the role of what you're doing is to spot concepts.
yeah. So I would say scalable is interesting because not everyone we meet with is scalable. I think there's a couple
Mhm.
things that go along with when we see trends, the scalability, obviously creativity. Most of the people we meet with all have the same story. It was friends and family, money, their back
Mhm.
was against the wall. They have a drive that's different than
Mhm.
your normal person. I mean, it is very, very street smart, hard work, creativity. And then you've got to think about the financial side. But I think as far as scalability, what's changed is you don't just have to be retail. You can do a little wholesale and then you can be, what really started in kind of around the 2010 era is the direct to consumer. And so they can reach the consumer and scale the business, whether it's social media, it's Instagram, it's Reels, it's, what's really been impactful is TikTok, Sheen as an app and as a retailer coming in is going to be huge. Temu out of China is kind of the same, as the Amazon of China. So I think what's allowed a lot of, different or new concepts to be scalable is the social selling of the concept and or short clips, short format. And also, if you think about traditional advertising, et cetera, how to get the word out, well, it doesn't live on TV anymore and it doesn't really live in the newspapers. So there's this
Mhm.
new social selling aspect or rolling out of stores that goes along with the physicality of opening new stores, if that makes sense.
So I want to ask you a question of how much of your work is looking ahead into the future to spot those next trends, whether as a percentage or just give me a sense of how much time you're looking into the future for the next opportunity and the next concepts.
It's all the time. I think that's one thing, that Northwood's known for. Usually we do, either first to market. I think in Austin, we did 65 first to market stores. We did the third away luggage store. So, this is 7 years ago when they were just starting out. So I think that it's what we call, the new frontier. What's next? What's the next frontier? So we're always kind of on the lookout, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a new retailer, whether it's men's or women's fashion, jewelry, Apple to, athleisure, et cetera. We're always on the lookout. And that's, either, and I would say I spend 40 to 50% of my time thinking about this because you want to be relevant. You
Hmm.
want the offering other people don't have. And it also gives you the one thing I kind of preach, you want to be the market taker. And I think retail's had so much retail built. We haven't in the last 10 years. But if you're not the market taker, you're just in the commodity business. And so
Hmm.
what we like to think about if we're going to place make, that you need these unique first to market or first tenants or best locals. And so, that's just kind of how we think about our business is, we've got to keep it fresh and relevant. We also need it to be productive. So those are the things, and we're kind of known for that. That tenants will seek us out a little bit. They hear that we're on the edge.
So you say you're spending 40, 50% of your personal time, but you also say Northwood is known for this, right? So how do you build that into the DNA of the organization and build that across so that the whole team is looking at it?
Well, one of the reasons I spend a lot of time in is that my background is leasing, so that's the heart and soul of what drives our centers. And I think
Mhm.
whether it's our leasing team, we've got some of the best young bright minds in the business. And I think having young people around in today's world is very, very helpful. They come up with
Mhm.
ideas. You hear about ideas that you aren't sure of, and they have a lot of conviction around it. So you're always learning. And so that's one of the reasons I spend more time is because there are all these different dynamics and there are these new concepts. And so as we, whether it's a marketing concept or a sponsorship concept, it's not just leasing. It's like, how does it all tie together? So, as the EVs have rolled out, we did a sponsorship deal with Rivian. We're doing some more potential store with them. So,
You talk about, young members of the team coming to you with ideas. We all know that not all ideas are good ideas and not all ideas are developed ideas. So, how do you spot a good idea quickly and how do you develop and support an idea that just needs a little bit of work?
I would say our young team, they have some of the brightest minds, and they source it all from whether it's watching some of the reality shows, some of these concepts or restaurants, things. I mean, from social media all the way through to Women's World Daily. I mean, walking the streets, we do all of that. Where they keep it fresh is some of the spaces I don't play or things I'm not necessarily into, but a lot of times they'll bring stuff up that is real or is going to be the next big thing. So I need to step back, absorb it, learn, and help them figure out how this is successful. I think your question, though, is spot on. Not all concepts work, not all concepts are scalable. And we see that all the time, so not a lot, but we see it.
So, talk to me about that process that you go through where you say, I have to come with an open mind and listen, learn, and absorb. What's that like? And how do you put yourself into that headspace to be open to new ideas?
Well, I think you either evolve or you die. You become irrelevant or you become stale. And so that's not an option, in my opinion. And I think also, when we think about content and context, we think about high quality assets. We have a grocery anchored center in Denver. We have a power center out in LA and Downey, and they're very basic. They're more commodity driven, grocery, Home Depot, very straightforward. But the real
Mhm.
space or the real sauce that we play in is, whether it's great food, health and beauty, health and wellness. We play in, whether we're starting to get into luxury now, the direct to consumer space. We kind of play in all those. So that's kind of how you learn, as things start to the transitioning of the way things are sold. So I think you really have to have an open mind. There's a lot of things you want to say no to.
And probably a number of things where initially you want to say no to, and then you're like, okay, let me actually think this through. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the thing that helps a lot of people is back to the story with Allie. She was able to explain dry bar in less, than 5 minutes and really in about 2 or 3 minutes. And if somebody can do that, you generally know they have a pretty good business. If they can just deduce it down to what they do, what they're good at. We're pretty good at thin slicing that
Hmm.
piece of the business because we've seen it so many times over our career, but not everyone does that. And so everybody has different styles. It's what we focus on now.
So thin slicing coming from Malcolm Gladwell in Blink,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Say a little bit more and unpack that. How does that become an advantage for you and for the team? How do you use it to evaluate?
Well, I think part of our job is to mitigate risk, right? Is this
Hmm.
tenant scalable financially? Are they capable of growing? So I think that's one of the ways I think about thin slicing, but also I do think ideals or concepts, I can usually see them pretty quick and understand, will it work? Can you scale it? Is it special? And I think the one thing we look for, Bill, is the concept proprietary? Is it,
Hmm.
if it's a commodity and it's a Starbucks or a McDonald's, those concepts are great. That's not what we do on a daily basis.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave a 5-star review at ratethispodcast.com/LTL and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcasts and on all major listening apps, as well as thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts.
There's a place for that in the world where people are
There
looking for
is.
something which is recognizable and familiar. But if you're trying to create a place which is a destination that people are looking for something unique or they can't find elsewhere, then you've got to do more curation and you've got to look and say, which are the ones that are going to create surprise, delight, or, repeat traffic, right? Of people coming back again and again.
Right. And we've had some fail, but I think one thing we're known for at Northwood is tenants trust us and they know we can deliver and they know they can do volumes with us. Whether we have 3 stores, 4 stores, we don't have somebody, we have 15 stores. We've got
Mhm.
all types of grocers, whether it's Whole Foods, Trader Joe's. But I think that's something that these newer tenants or these evolving tenants over the last 7 to 10 years, one of the reasons they come to us is they know they can trust us and we can deliver. And it's, there's always in retail been this kind of white hat, black hat. I don't think it's that
Mhm.
complicated. We're really partners at the end of the day. I mean,
And that leads to a conversation as well around authenticity,
yes,
humanity. I
yes.
would love to hear your thoughts on that in terms of the relationship, because that white hat, black hat, how do you build the relationship and the trust that you need to go
Yeah.
forward?
I think part of authenticity is the truth. I just think just being yourself, being candid with people, being open. And then I think the authenticity piece, we have a street in Austin called Rock Rose that may be in suburban America, which may be one of the most urban streets. It was a lot of the guys from 6th Street that
Mhm.
our partners were able to put together. They came up with this idea. These guys were tired of the bar scene in Austin down on 6th Street. And we were able to just bring them to suburban America in Austin. And it has been wildly, wildly successful. And so we've taken that concept and we've transferred it to Charlotte. We've got something called the Bowl, and it's a lot smaller. It's about 80,000 feet. We had one of the original breweries in the South End, OMB, come to us like 5 years ago. We'll open him next spring. But having had that street, we had the credibility that we could put this together. And it was really just changing out the content, making it smaller and scalable. So a lot of locals, regionals. It's going to be very, very, very unique. But we actually, through our partners, learned you could pull this off. And there aren't many of them, but I think it will be highly successful.
So I know you talk a lot about the importance of vision, strategy, and execution. And when we couple those three things with content and context, it's a question of how do you get it done and what do you need to do to get it done, right? So it's not just about seeing the big picture, getting things done. Talk to me about that.
I'd say the vision, strategy, and execution is just the way we explain our business. I try to keep it simple. I don't say, we are from coast to coast, from California to north to the Carolinas, but I try to keep the business very, very simple by just saying, we come up with a vision if we're looking at a new asset or an asset we own. And the vision is, can we all kind of agree? Is it going to be soft goods? Is it going to be food? Is it going to be locks? What's the idea? Then you go into the strategy, what are you going to need? Resource wise, you think about that. Is it capital? Is it paint? Is it a redevelopment? And then you go into the execution, and that's where the actual people and the rolling the sleeves up. And that's where, whether it's, convincing a tenant or working with a tenant to open them in a new market, redeveloping the asset, bringing a new ice cream, coffee, a unique toy store that we have out in the Forum, Geppetto's, those are the things that make things special. So we just try to keep it that way. So I think vision, strategy, and execution. And then if you tie it to content and context, that kind of fits with what our vision, strategy, and execution is. It's getting the right content and context. And so that's those two married together. And that's how you come out with highly productive centers. And I think if they're productive, other tenants know to follow.
So I want to switch to a question around thought leadership, but it builds on what you just said. And it's about reaching your target audience, which are in many cases those distinctive entrepreneurs, whether the local business or the person who has an idea who can scale, but they're category creating, for example. How are you using thought leadership, or how are you reaching them so that they know that you're looking for them and that you're curious to hear their ideas? Because I think part of it is you could do the outbound, but in your world, you also want inbound, or people saying, oh, we want to work with you, right? Because you get us, you understand. So how do you use that thought leadership and get the word out to the entrepreneurship community?
One of the things we do is we're big on meeting face-to-face, principal to principal, whether it's the CEO, the CFO, the real estate person. I mean, we are big on jumping on airplanes, literally saying, I'm going to see XYZ tomorrow. We had a leasing meeting. We have them every Monday, 6 or 7 years ago. And there was a concept in Sea Island, Georgia. And I said, who's going to see this concept? It was a restaurant. No one raised their hand. I said, I'm going tomorrow. And I think I think in thought leadership, it's that kind of leadership that, I'm willing to go. I spent the day, I made new friends, with this couple. They were moving their family. They've got really successful concepts. But I think that's how you think about it, is like, I got to be the first guy in the door. You know why? Because if I'm not, my competition's going to be there. And so if I want the uniqueness of it, every meeting's important. I got to be first in, and I for sure have to be the last guy to have the final say. So I think that's really, really important, to be kind of one of the first meetings. We were with a tenant last week in New York that said, we met you 3 or 4 years ago. We had one store. We didn't know what we were doing. That they now have 61. We have 4 stores with them, Goriana Jewelry out of Laguna. The first meeting took us 3 years to do the first deal, but it was worth it. So it's not always about the immediate sell. It's about building the relationship, building trust, and again, back to deliverability. And then ultimately it comes down, can they be productive, and is it good for us, for both of us?
Well, and I love that example from Gloriana where you say, hey, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, it wasn't the right time, but we know we want to talk with you, right?
Right.
Those are the conversations where you're starting well around third base, heading towards home rather than having to introduce yourself.
Right. I mean, we met him. He said, I'd never been to ICSC. It was 3 or 4 years ago. Jacqueline, who works with me, we've worked together for almost 15 years. He met her and said, we stayed friends. He told her no, for 3 years. We just opened in Nashville, Austin, et cetera. But, he reminded us of it took us 3 years to do our first store with you. And now we've done 3 in like 18 months. So it's not, I think a lot of people think it's all an immediate sell. What we're trying to sell is not a commodity. It's a better experience, a better place. If you think about that, it's going to take a lot longer. And the desirability of these tenants for the better landlords, we all want the same guys. It's no secret. So you've got to separate yourself from the pack. And then part of the question is, how do they find you? Some of them, either it's people we work with, they all talk. And so 4 or 5 of these tenants will all talk about landlords they can do business with. We feel like we're one of the 4 or 5 that's at the top of the list. And so I think we've built that reputation to be able to be in a position to be sought out, where it's not always us being the one seeking.
So I want to ask you a question personally. I know you and your team describe you as a voracious reader. So my question is, what's on your nightstand currently and why?
Yeah, I'd say both books. There's kind of 2. There's one I keep running. I don't know why I keep running into it. I gave the team it. There's a book by Annie Duke. It's How to Decide. And Annie Duke was a professional gambler. And I think she's at Penn and does cogitative thoughts, but she helps people on Wall Street, et cetera. And she talks a lot about recency bias, what just worked, a lot of people think will work again. She talks a lot about resulting, talks about decision trees, but most importantly, she talks about luck and kind of hard work and reading, being able to understand that. So that's one of the books. And the other book kind of ties to some of the same applications where it's kind of practical intelligence and street smart and hustle. I think that's what we are attracted to. And it's Rich Paul's book, my memoir, How I Changed the Odds. And for people that don't know, Rich Paul, he started Clutch Sports. He was a kid that grew up in Cleveland. He was a dice player in his teens. He started selling jerseys and he got in a little bit of trouble. And, his fate was he met LeBron James in the Akron airport wearing a Warren Moon jersey. And now he's one of the largest agents in basketball and all sports. And I think his drive, desire, where he came from, I think the street smart, the practical intelligence, we're real drawn to people because I think these founder businesses that we're discussing, retailers, they all kind of have this practical intelligence, street smart. And I think luck is a true derivative of hard work. And I don't think there's you don't wake up and win the lottery. You just don't. Yeah, that's not how it works. So
that's not a business plan, right?
No.
You've got to be more scrappy than that.
But I also think people that are in the streets have really high observations. And when they get in around really smart people, there's a lot of people that can cite a lot of really good, interesting data. But the people that are really street smart or kind of understand, how things play out, they're really good listeners and they can take what they're hearing and apply it to their business. Again, I go back to the practical intelligence, and that is just implementing what you've learned or what you've been educated or what you're willing to go learn versus just reading books, going through annual reports, et cetera, that doesn't tell you the truth. What's in the streets or what you observe is really the truth.
Well, that goes back to your conversation with the founder of Drive Bar and her ability to articulate the idea in less than 2 minutes,
Right.
and your ability to evaluate that and go, yes, this is an idea and a founder that can make it work.
You're correct. 100%.
And that ability on both sides really is needed for an idea to scale. Because otherwise, if you don't have someone say to believe in and back, and it starts, like you said, with the entrepreneur story of friends and family, but it also then sort of gets momentum and snowballs. The ability for other people to buy into an idea makes the difference.
And we've seen, what's interesting about the last couple of years, Bill, is we've seen, some of these concepts, Peloton, they think, we've seen the crash, right? I mean, we thought it was the second coming. We have one. Some of these concepts that were creative thought, the TAM, the total addressable market was, much larger than it was. So we started to see the wheels kind of coming off earlier than most. And it's unfortunate, it's a great product, but I think everybody thought everyone was going to have one in their house, and that's not reality, right? So,
right. And I think when you talk from a TAM perspective, it's easy to extrapolate the first few years of rapid growth and assume that the line will continue to go up at the same or increasing rate. And then soon you're promising you'll have 16 billion people on the planet using your service or product. And you're like, wait a minute, that's not possible. There's only 8 billion.
Right. Well, and I think the other thing too that's changed is retail. It was always, can we get to 300-400 stores? And I was on the phone with somebody last week that said a retailer in Chicago went from 9 to 5 stores in Chicago is just as profitable and doing just as much as the sales are exactly the same. So I think we grew up in an era, like I said, kind of from the 60s through the mid 2000s of just like grow, get 300, 400, 500 stores, for the mall base. Walmart, I think, is at like 4,000, Target's at however many stores they're at. But I think it was always grow. And I think now it's more about where's the consumer? How do we make it convenient? And I think that's really what people need to address is like, it's got to be convenient because you are fighting online. Let's not confuse.
Yeah.
Convenience is a huge issue today.
But that example of going from 9 stores to 5 stores, it's sacrificing footprint to be able to serve a target audience better and say, we're going to double down here because we know this is where our best customers either want to come or the experience they want. And we can do more with less and have higher profitability, whether by square foot or by unit, et cetera, and say, this is the right choice. And it's hard to let go sometimes of that idea that more is better.
I totally agree. And we're seeing it play out in real time with the department stores with kind of the Macy's announcement earlier in the week. Is it real? Is it just a real estate play? We don't know. But even they have shrunk from 1,300 stores. I think they're down to like 8, and they could be half the size, right? And they're doing smaller formats. So I think to your point, I go back to what I've been saying is where can we be the most productive with our resources? You only have so much human capital and you only have so much capital. So like, what's the best use of it? And that's something we really think about, like human capital and how do we make it the most productive, and marry those two.
And I would add a third element to that list of time, right? Because
100%.
even if you had constraints on capital and human capital, given enough time, you could make impact. But we don't have it on that. So as we begin to wrap up, Ward, I want to ask you a question. And this is to go back a little bit in a time machine and ask you, what advice would you give your younger self, knowing what you know today about creating impact and spotting good ideas?
I've been in the business 35 years almost, and or 35 years. And I think one thing of, the younger self, and I've worked in every asset class, started in the mall space, that's outlet, et cetera. I've done outlet, I've done power, I've done grocery, specialty, mixed use. So I've kind of seen all the asset classes. And I think one of the things is patience, obviously. And also when you're working on long projects where it's a development, whether it was Scottsdale Quarter or the Domain, or, we're working on Valentine with our Northwood office partners. These projects can be 4 or 5 years, and not everyone can finish. You see a lot of people midway through, or, in 2 instances, we've had to reorganize the team just because we can see people get burned out. It's a long time from concept to actual development to actual opening, and it may be in phases. So I think the one thing is to tell my former self, this can take a long time. Be patient, and it's not going to happen overnight. And just stay positive, because you're constantly, the deals like that, they stop and start. They're near death. Like 8 times during the 4 years. I mean, I haven't been through one where you aren't at the edge of a catastrophe, and you just got to be resourceful to it. So my younger self would say everything will be fine, even though it's not, at the time.
So as you're talking about, the starts and stops of deals and how long it can take, I'm thinking here, I live in Las Vegas, and Fontainebleau Casino just opened yesterday. And so an incredible brand in South Florida, incredible history. They were building a property here in Vegas, and they got hit by capital crunch in the Great Recession in 2008, sold to private equity, and it finally got control of the property again 10 years later. And now 20 years after, it's actually opened as a property with their vision. So I think about that story in terms of, how long it takes from the seed of an idea. And that building was sitting empty for 15 years on the strip. That's an expensive shell of a building.
Yeah. And, the Sofer family owning, Aventura obviously has a lens to retail like nobody. I mean, I have a lot of respect to be able to hold on, and then doing the Fontainebleau, maybe one of the most iconic hotels, not only in Florida, but in the country, and then transferring it to Vegas, where everything you do, you got to, with the Sphere, with the stadium. I mean, you got to bring, Vegas is not a place where you're just you want to be a market taker. So, hopefully they gave the town. I saw some pictures today of it, and we talked to some of the tenants that were going out there. So congratulations to Las Vegas for finally getting it done, and to the team, because that's a long time. I mean,
it is
a long grind.
Indeed. So Ward, I want to thank you for taking time today for a conversation around the ability to spot ideas, to nurture ideas, and also then make sure that the idea gets executed. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for your time.
If you're interested in organizational thought leadership, then I invite you to subscribe to the OrgTL newsletter. Each month, we talk about the people who create, curate, and deploy thought leadership on behalf of their organizations. Go to the website orgtl.com and choose Join Our Newsletter. I'll leave a link to the website as well as my LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing what you thought of the show.